name is Donna Sedalter-Toman. I'm delighted to be here as a member of the Democratic City Committee of Gloucester and interviewing Matthew Murray, our vice co-chair of the Democratic Gloucester City Committee, as well as member in standing for 8 years of the State Democratic Committee, who's going to speak to us about the primary, caucuses, etc. So Matt, talk to me about the primary. What's the purpose of it? How is it being managed, etc.?
So, as a lot of people may know, whether you're tuned into politics or not, but it's very hard not to be these days, it is an election year it was a presidential election year, which means that it is a very, very busy year electorally in the country at large, but also especially in the Democratic Party. We are just at the cusp right now of going into primary season. As this is the February episode of Democratic Dialogue, this will be aired at least probably a few times after the Iowa caucus and New Hampshire primary have happened. So some of our audience watching this will be already in the thick of it. But Massachusetts primary is on March 3rd, 2020. And we are, as we were previously, we are now a Super Tuesday state. We have a lot of other states that have clustered around this one particular day. We don't have a national primary. We do not have an official national primary day. And of course, really, each primary, and really, when we get to the general election, it's really 50 smaller units, 51, including Washington, D.C., holding individual elections by their own rules to elect delegates, or in the general, to elect electors to elect the president. So what's fascinating about Super Tuesday this year is that a lot of the other larger states are voting on the same day, so it's going to change the dynamic a little bit. But what we have here in Massachusetts is we have our regular presidential primary, which the results of which determine how many delegates we allocate for Massachusetts, for each candidate, for Massachusetts delegation to the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee at the end of July. This year is going to be a little wild, if anybody's been watching the polls. In previous years, it's been a little bit clearer by the time Massachusetts votes who the top vote getters are, or in years like 2012, where it was just President Obama being reelected, all of the delegates everywhere went to him. In 2016, Massachusetts voted almost exactly 50-50, 49-51, Bernie, Hillary. So we split our votes generally about. The threshold for getting a delegate, for winning delegates, is 15%. And there's two different categories where this falls into, by congressional district and statewide. So if I'm Pete Buttigieg and I don't win 15% of the statewide ballot, I don't get any at-large ballots, but if I won 20% in Congressional District 6, I will get one delegate from the 6th Congressional District. So it can be a real patchwork. And as of filming, where we are right now, the polls have Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, and all very much,
everybody else, yeah,
way above everyone else, and Pete Buttigieg being a leap and a bound maybe behind them, but also in some polls slightly over 15%. So there could be four candidates who pull delegates from Massachusetts, depending on how it works, depending on how it works out. Which could be very interesting.
So how many state delegates are there versus, well, we know how many congressional districts, but what's the number of the full state?
I don't have the number there. It's six per congressional district, so it's...
Okay. And how are these people, city and town committee members, elected?
So that's the next, that I would say, I would go with talking about how the delegates are elected first.
Okay.
So once we've allocated how many delegates each of these candidates gets, there is an opportunity to run to be these delegates. These delegates are not pre-selected. Some campaigns will pre-select delegates and slates of delegates depending on who have been their supporters. If you would like to be a delegate to the National Convention, everyone is free to run. Registered Democrats are free to run. There will be caucuses held all on the same day in April to elect to be, if you want to be one of Bernie's delegates, if you want to be one of Joe Biden's or Elizabeth Warren's delegates, or whoever wins. We don't, I'm not
Right.
predicting, I'm just quoting the current polls in mid-January. But it does help if you've been a long-term supporter. It does help if you can show that you've knocked doors in New Hampshire for these candidates who are already running. And you can, if you don't mind a little cold weather, you can have a stroll around Portsmouth and talk somebody's ear off about Andrew Yang. And it really, so it does help to do that. And of course, these delegates will then go to Milwaukee. So what you were getting at there, which is also on our primary ballot, is the official election of town or city committee and ward committee members, and the re-election of ballot state committee members, who will also be on the ballot. Every 4 years, the Democratic Party reorganizes its membership. The state committee is re-elected. The executive offices of the state committee are re-elected, including the vice chairs, the treasurers, deputy treasurers, secretary, and all the way up to the chair. And then also individual members of city and town committees and city committees are broken up into wards, like Gloucester has 4 or 5 wards. So each ward committee and town committee have up to 35 members, with certain exceptions. So Gloucester is made up of 5 ward committees, or Rockport, Essex, Manchester, and Ipswich are towns, so they have 1 town committee of 35 members. And depending on what their bylaws say about how they re-elect their leadership and their executive level, they may also be holding those elections at the same time. So it's actually the ballots for that are set, but it's an opportunity to get elected to these town committees or city committees and have your name on the ballot next to Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or hopefully the future president of the United States.
Well, I want to come back to this if we have time later, but who can actually vote in the Democratic primary?
So in Massachusetts, we have open primaries in all primaries, which means that you do not have to be a registered Democrat or Republican to vote in the Democratic or Republican primaries. Although, if you are a registered Democrat, or if you're a registered Republican or Green or Libertarian, you can only vote in those primaries.
So independents can vote wherever they want.
But, exactly. So independents, people who are registered to vote but not members of a particular party. And confusingly, in Massachusetts, we do not use the word independent, we use the word unenrolled, which comes with it this weird connotation that sounds like you're not registered. It's just that you're unenrolled. And in Massachusetts, as in most states, independents, people who are registered voters in good standing, who are capable of voting, make up about 60 to 65% of our entire electorate. The other 35 to 40% are the Democrats and Republicans. More Democrats than Republicans usually, except in Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, and one other western state where Republicans actually outnumber Democrats.
And how long before the election do people need to
20
be
days. So
Okay.
I believe before I believe it's February 12th, I believe, is the deadline to vote. Yes, it's the deadline to register to vote in the primary.
And in addition to the possible split of delegates, given so many candidates, what else is different this year? Anything?
That's pretty much the biggest thing that's different than 2016. The rest of the ballot is going to be pretty much the same. There will be, and also the ballot, people running for ballot state committee seats. There's a male and female state committee seat on every ballot in each of the 40 Senate by Senate district. in Massachusetts. So that's 40 times
So,
2. That's
one
that's 80.
question. I'm sorry.
Yep.
A question, given the delegates and who's most likely to be supported, given their support for a particular candidate, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
who ultimately decides who those delegates are going to be?
So this is interesting. So it's the people. So this is what's really extraordinary and a lot of fun about a presidential election year is that, and this is that a lot of people constantly and always feel that politics and be getting involved with with the political system around them, and this is oh, that's somebody, it's that happens to something happens to somebody else, like it's like somebody's house burning down. Oh, that happens to other people. Not that I want anybody's house to burn down, but this is one of the years where it absolutely can, politics can happen to you. You can get very involved at any time, at any level. American democracy is a participatory sport. It's not a spectator sport, and there is a gluttony of the riches of opportunities to be able to get involved. And one of the ways is to participate in one of these caucuses for delegate. Even if you're a relatively new person, if you're a registered Democrat, you can participate in these caucuses to elect delegates. You can come and participate in the caucus to
Explain what the caucus
so
actually
there are
does.
2 caucuses, and this is where things are going to start getting a little confusing. This is a little bit like how people say, Boston has 2 state houses, 2 city halls, and 2 school streets, and it's very confusing because there's an old and a new. So this year there's 2 primaries and there's 2 caucuses, and I'm just going to talk about the ones that happen in the spring, except both caucuses happen in the spring. So the caucus that I'm referring to right now is the caucus to select the delegates to the DNC on the line that we're talking about right here. They will be held in early April, and depending on how many different candidates draw delegates from each congressional district is how many caucuses there will be. For example, in 2016, the 2 candidates who drew enough votes in Massachusetts to get delegates, sorry, Governor O'Malley, he did not get enough, were Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Hillary Clinton of New York. And so on this particular day, there was a Bernie caucus held in Newburyport, and there was a Hillary caucus held in Peabody. And this was the same in each of our other 8 congressional districts. And so it was very easy. If you were a Bernie supporter, you could go to the Bernie caucus, and if you're a Hillary supporter, you go to the Hillary caucus. And there, the people who had expressed an interest in running for DNC delegate put themselves up, gave speeches, organized, votes, and you were able, at what point you were able to vote for these people.
So conceivably, we could have 4 separate caucuses in each of the 8 congressional districts.
Conceivably, yes.
Okay.
Well, conceivably, if everybody got just 15%, you could have 6 too. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think this top 3 plus Pete, depending on where you are.
Well, Klosterbar is moving
pretty,
up too, so.
Exactly, and now she's got the endorsement, the co-endorsement
Of the Times.
of the New York Times. So we'll see where that takes us. So the other.
When
Sorry,
is
no.
the caucus, actually?
So what?
The caucus.
When is it?
Yeah.
It's April. I believe it's the 2nd Saturday in April.
Okay. And anyone can run for a delegate.
Anyone
that
can run,
department.
but as I said earlier,
They have to be
the
registered.
candidates, you have to be a registered Democrat, and the individual campaigns sometimes will run slates, and also if you've never participated before, or if you can't demonstrate that you've done a little bit of volunteer work here and there, it'll be harder to run because you're talking about 2 or 3 seats out of several hundred people maybe who want to run. A lot of people are very excited about Bernie Sanders and not Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Warren, and they were excited about Hillary 4 years ago. A lot of people run and for these seats, and we don't know. We'll see how many each candidate gets.
What does the state convention actually accomplish?
So that's the state convention or the national convention?
The state.
Okay, so we're jumping ahead a little bit here.
Did you want to talk a little bit more about the caucus?
Yeah, yes.
All right, let's do it while we have the opportunity.
So, the other caucus that is...
That's right, the two caucuses. right.
Okay. The other caucus that's going to be held in this spring is to select delegates to our state convention. This is another thing. So we have 2 primaries, 2 caucuses, 2 conventions. There's a lot of places to get involved this year, and there's double. And if you think there's only 3, double it. So the Massachusetts Democratic Party holds a statewide convention every year, and every even-numbered year, generally, with the exception of 2016, there's usually something that the state party needs to vote on to nominate. So this year, it's the big issue at the state convention, which will be held in Lowell on May 30th, is the Markey Kennedy race. Joe Kennedy is challenging Ed Markey. It's an internal Democratic Party thing, and in order to get on the ballot, in September, in the September primary, Joe Kennedy needs 15% of the votes of the delegates at the May 30th caucus. Now, here's the thing: how do you pick the delegates who go to the Lowell convention in May? And that's done through the caucus system that are held in each town committee and each ward committee in Massachusetts. And the Gloucester Democratic City Committee holds their caucus. We hold it in conjunction with one of our regular monthly meetings. This year it will be in our March monthly meeting, which is March 12th. It'll be at the Gloucester House at 6 p.m. You must be a registered Democrat. This is not some place where independents can come. And you come in, everyone sections off by ward, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we, as ward committees, select the delegates to represent the wards in Lowell. It is now a binary race. There were up to 4 people running at one point, but Steve Pemberton and Shannon Liss Reardon have removed themselves from the race. They've withdrawn, as a number of people have withdrawn from the presidential race as well. So it is just Markey Kennedy. Now, the vote on May 30th can go one of several ways. Kennedy is fairly popular, so he's likely to get his 15%. But if one of the candidates gets more than 50%, that is a formal endorsement by the Democratic Party.
Interesting.
But if the other candidate gets 15%, they're not endorsed, but they're still on the ballot, which, because of the way that we set up the timetable for our state convention and our ultimate fall primary, sometimes flips things. In 2014, for example, the state convention formally endorsed Steve Grossman for governor.
Remember that.
By, I think it wasn't a huge margin, but it was over 50, but it was over 50. And then he ultimately ended up losing the primary to Martha Coakley. And of course, if Ed Markey gets more than 85%,
He's endorsed.
Therefore, Joe could not possibly get his 15.
Well, hypothetically,
that's a nomination in the primary.
So hypothetically, if they each get 50 or they get that close,
Yep.
are the delegates basically split?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is exactly what happened 2 years ago at the state convention when Josh Zakem beat
I remember.
Bill Galvin 52 to 48 for the endorsement, and then Galvin came back and cleaned his clock a bit. Well, wasn't a blowout, but Galvin is still our Secretary of State, because ultimately the primary, it does seem a little redundant in some ways, and in some ways it absolutely is. But the timetable that Massachusetts has for holding its convention and for the Democratic State Convention and then our primary leaves that window open.
One quick question. Can someone apply to be a delegate in both of these, the national and the state?
Absolutely, they're not mutually exclusive, and I would imagine most people who are delegates to the federal probably would have attended there, knowing this activist class. Which, as I speak of it, you have people think of who are a lot of people see people who are involved in politics or who knock doors or carry signs or walk in the Horribles parade as being sort of, like this closed group of people, and it may be an interesting tribe that we make up, but we're not a closed door. Anybody can participate. Come walk with us in the parade. If you don't want to knock doors and whatever, come walk with us in the parade. Come come to our monthly meetings, second Thursday of the month at the Gloucester House. We'll feed you. There's a lot of opportunities to participate, and especially this year.
Is there anything you want to add that's important to know about the state convention?
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of good networking opportunities to meet people, especially getting a chance to talk to you can talk to our state rep anytime. You can see Ann Margaret anytime here in Gloucester. But if you'd like to know who her coworkers are and who the other elected Democrats are in the community on Beacon Hill, constitutional officers, the other electeds, the 34 senators who are Democrats. We have a Republican senator here, but he's one of 7.
Like
6.
like the one in Springfield. Are there going to be breakout sessions and different presentations and everything
That is
following
still
those?
being prepared. That's still being. It depends on time and the amount of time that there is it's allocated. There is this big vote, which presumably won't take a lot of time because there's not a lot of. It'll take as long as a vote takes. If there were a lot of candidates, or if there were, then the possibility of reballoting could come up.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
If say Steve Pemberton and Shannon Liss Reardon were still in the race, and one of them got barely enough to, one of them got 15.2% and one of them got 8%, and or I'd have to actually look at the math to make this, then one of them could go strike a deal with Markey or Kennedy to say, listen, I will direct, if you hold another ballot, I will direct all of my remaining delegates. Of course, by the way, remaining delegates is the thing, because people, after the first ballot, a lot of people just take off and go home. I will direct all of my delegates to support you if I get this, and the other thing. So you can have some of these interesting things that go on, and that's not as always that common, but that is something to wait for, to look for in the national convention, because if by having this new Super Tuesday, it's not an official system, but by having all these major states vote at the same time, it's very possible that we won't have a clear nominee going into Milwaukee, which is something that hasn't been true in a long, long time. We have had candidates potentially challenge the nominee. For example, when Ted Kennedy tried to unseat Jimmy Carter in 1980, that was a thing. It was a big national story. You'd have to be somebody as famous as Ted Kennedy to even get as far along the road as it did. Same thing in 70. People forget in 76 there were people pushing Ronald Reagan to nudge Jerry Ford from the more conservative side of the Republican Party. That doesn't happen all that often, and it doesn't very often, and it rarely ever succeeds unless you're talking about the deep, dark, 150 years ago, middle of the 19th century. But this year, we could very well go into a convention with 3 or 4, at least 3 candidates. No one has hit the 50% threshold. They're going to have to work it out. Somebody's going to have to get offered vice president. Somebody's going to have to get offered ambassador to someplace real nice, Antigua, something like that. There's going to be a lot of
Not Russia?
a lot of deals made up to the convention, and hopefully it will be clear by the convention. There were a lot of people who were still very loyal to Bernie Sanders, who hoped to try to force a brokered convention in 16, but Hillary went in with the numbers. She had 50%. There was nothing you could really do. There weren't going to be a lot of Hillary people defecting. These people have been elected in their home districts, however, whatever mechanism each state uses to elect delegates, and they promised to vote for Hillary Clinton. You might have had a couple of defectors here and there, but by and large, the margins she had were fairly solid. That when people came out to cast their ballots,
Right.
It was, Hillary was clearly had 50% of the delegates. This year is very possible that the Democratic National Convention is going to make for some good TV.
That's for sure. We're almost out of time, so I guess my end question is, what have we not discussed as yet or have been presented that you want to say before we close out?
What I would say is I want to reiterate how incredibly easy it is to get involved this year with anything and how vital it is. This is not the year to think that politics happens to other people. I saw a post recently where somebody was complaining. I've seen many posts recently where people are complaining about how many political posts there are on Facebook, and I have a number of responses to that, starting with, well, aren't you glad you don't live in China? Because we live in a world where we have more of an ability to express our opinions immediately than we ever have before, for good or for ill. But politics and being involved in our democratic system and our democracy is as important as it ever was, and maybe more so.
Especially now.
And I'm sorry that some people feel a little bit burdened by reading other people's opinions, but Having
gotten the same request, I said, sorry, don't read them.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
I would say, sorry, you should need to read them. I would apologize the other way. This is the price of knowing what's going on. It's just
Exactly.
The price of freedom is to know what's going on and participate in it.
Right, as exhausting as it
is exhausting, but it is better than living in North Korea.
Yes, I would agree. Well, I think that wraps it up, and thank you so much.
Thank you for joining the Democratic Dialogue family on your first go out here.
My pleasure.